There we go. All right. It's 7 o'clock. It's the last Wednesday of the month. Hello, Boston Unity Group. Welcome. We are back tonight with our special guest from Unity Technologies. We have Dan Miller with us, who is going to answer all the questions that you all submitted on the form that we did out recently. If you did not fill out the form, shame on you, but it's okay. Type your message into the Twitch chat. We will ask Dan your questions as best we can throughout the meeting, and he will do his best to answer your questions. We have, let me make this small. We have one event coming up that we wanted to mention to the audience, there is game coming up in July, like next month. That's ominously soon. So that anyone who wants to join the Game Loop Unconference awesome event, you can. I'm going to post these links into the Twitch chat, so you'll be able to visit these links, because obviously your screen isn't clickable until I put it into the chat. You can find out more about Game Loop. It's a really good event. So also, likely you found us here via either our meetup or Twitch or Twitter, but we are on the web, and contact us if you have any questions about bug or suggestions for things you would like us to talk about. Thank you, Graham. You handled the whole clicking the linky thing. That's a technical term, that. So yes, we have Graham and Elliot, my two co-organizers, and we are delighted to present Dan Miller. Dan, are you prepared for tonight? We've had a lot of questions for you.
I am prepared, and I'm also really excited. I just want to say thanks a lot for having me, and I'm happy we were able to get this organized. I did see a little bit of the pre-questions. Some were a bit spicy. I'm certainly open to taking questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of them. I don't have all the knowledge, but I certainly have a lot of resources, have some information, and I'm hoping to answer as many as I can. And I actually did want to start off. I'm going to present just a couple kind of random topics and questions that I saw listed that were most applicable to kind of my skills and experience, and also just kind of warm things up a little bit. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this. Yes, I see some nods. Cool. So yeah, my name is Dan Miller. I work at Unity as a senior developer advocate focused on XR. You can follow me on Twitter too. Mostly post AR, VR related stuff. Kind of been getting more towards just game stuff lately. But yeah, I'm really excited, just kind of an open fireside chat and AMA. So what I wanted to do, at least initially, is kind of go through just some topics I saw with some questions. I know there was some kind of open questions. I also know there's some things we might touch on again with some of the questions here. But first, just AR Foundation. So if you're not familiar, AR Foundation is basically a cross-platform API for AR development, mostly focused around mobile AR development. So, being able to search around, find surfaces, place content, mostly around ARKit and AR Core. So really it's, as mentioned, kind of there. And where it's at now is we're kind of working closely with the different platforms as well as the partners. There's some future work being done on things like camera visual feature improvements. And really it's more on the API side to try to enable developers a little easier access to things like lighting and rendering settings, as well as kind of platform specific features like camera grain, for example. And of course, there's always kind of work happening as the platform partners update new features. We kind of roll them into AR Foundation and expose them in this kind of unified API. One thing, and this kind of actually probably relates to some of the other questions here, is Unity and developing in Unity, we're kind of in the package phase. So everything's a package now, and there's lots of different versions of packages. And something that can be challenging is just kind of figuring out, what's the right version. So with AR Foundation, we actually verify it. And this is the AR Foundation package. which is now in sync with kind of the ARKit and the ARCore package. And there's kind of different versions of those that get verified with different versions of the Unity editor. Now, what you'll notice here is there's some overlap. So if you look at something like version 4.1, you can see it's verified with Unity 2021.1, but it's actually compatible all the way back to Unity 2019.4 LTS. So this is kind of this thing where, verification within the package lifecycle means it kind of goes through the full QA process, but we also have compatibility with different kind of versions of Unity as well. And in this case, we know a lot of users are on the 2019.4 LTS. And so we've made sure to have the kind of compatibility there. Now, there are some kind of API changes that were within the core editor there. So you can see there's kind of a cutoff, obviously, with the latest version on 4.2. Some of the latest features on AR Foundation, things like scene reconstructions. This is the meshing feature available on LiDAR-enabled devices. Here you're actually seeing a kind of wireframe shader that's flipping between, there's this idea of when you enable plane tracking with the scene reconstruction, it actually flattens out surfaces and gives you lower density mesh here. So basically I'm enabling plane tracking, and you can see it kind of basically creates less triangles there on the wall surface. Another big feature available on both ARKit and ARCore is the depth API. So this is actually returning a depth image at runtime. Here on the ARKit side of things, this is recorded on an iPad. It uses the LiDAR sensor as well. So it's only available on LiDAR devices. And it basically allows you to kind of query that depth image and enable different features with it. So there's been things with like dynamic fog. You can also use it for kind of quickly placing content, doing things like dynamic occlusion, etc. So it is available on both ARKit and ARCore. On the ARCore side, it's kind of a pure machine learning where it's just taking a look at the actual image itself. Although there are devices with kind of time of flight sensors that can enhance that depth image on the Android side. Then last but not least, there's recording and playback. So this is a new feature available in AR Foundation 4.2 and available on ARCore. And it basically allows you to actually record kind of an MP4 or a video file on device and then play that back on device. And it'll kind of create an additional data stream related to things like found planes, feature points, etc. Now, right now, there's not really kind of a full, let's say, life cycle where you're kind of like recording it on device, bringing it to the editor and things like that. We do have some of that functionality just built into the Unity Mars package, but this is kind of a specific feature on ARCore, really looking at kind of, let's say you go to a location, you record a certain kind of session where you're able to kind of walk through it, place content, and then you can replay that after you've kind of modified your app or made some updates to it to kind of redo that simulation on the device itself. All right. And so there was some questions around XR plugin management. So if you're not familiar, on the kind of XR side, this is basically a way to kind of manage the different platforms. So it's things like, how do you enable, let's say, the Oculus platform alongside, something like the Steam VR platform, or how do you enable ARKit and ARCore in the same package or in the same project? And so really this is now, it's kind of its own package within Unity, and it has a scriptable object that has kind of all these different settings with it. And it actually can be kind of enabled at runtime. So there's an initialize on load checkbox there. You can uncheck. You can kind of initialize it through the scripting API. And a lot of this is in the XR plugin management documentation. There's actually specific scripts for doing things like runtime initialization and also things like reordering. So in the past, there was kind of a list of the different platforms that you had, and you could actually kind of drag that around to reorder it, and that would determine how those platforms were initialized. By default, right now, it's just alphabetized. And if you do need access or you do need to reorder it, you actually need to kind of write your own XR loader, which gives you a little more control over how and when those platforms are initialized for the different projects. And of course, there's kind of per build target as well. So there is settings for something like, a desktop PC versus Android. So this is a big one, is basically multi-platform VR development. So, how do you have a single project that targets things like high-end PC VR, as well as something like the Oculus Quest and everything in between? And really, from the Unity standpoint, of course, we work closely with all of these different platform partners, as well as the different kind of headset manufacturers and the ecosystem developers. And through this, we're also part of the Kronos group, which is kind of a standardization group. I'm sure you're familiar with things like OpenGL, and now there is OpenXR. So this is basically a standardization of different XR-specific features, as well as a spec that you can build towards. So with this, developers and platform holders can actually build against this spec. And at Unity, we've integrated an OpenXR package. Now, what this means is instead of actually choosing specific platforms like Oculus or like Steam VR, you can just choose the OpenXR package. And then if the platform that you're trying to build for has a conformant OpenXR runtime, then it should kind of just work. And that's kind of on the platform itself. Now, with that in mind, we've also built what we call OpenXR extensions, and these are kind of platform-specific features. So there's things like the Valve Index controller extension to actually get access to some of the specific configurations around that. And there's also kind of different ones for the HTC Vive, et cetera. So at a high level, what we really recommend is that OpenXR is kind of the way forward with these different kind of multi-platform projects. Now, it was verified in the 2020 LTS. There was a recent update. So the 1.2 version of the package actually added support for the Oculus Quest, as well as haptics. Now, you might notice the little asterisk there with the Quest. And if you look in the documentation, right now, Oculus doesn't actually recommend using OpenXR when developing for the Quest. And some of that's a little bit on the kind of platform side where there's certain features that are available in the Oculus package, as well as the kind of Oculus utilities that aren't yet enabled in OpenVR. So you're looking at things like, fixed foveated rendering, late latching, some of those platform specific features that allow you to kind of take your content to the next level on the Oculus Quest are just not available in extensions or within the core OpenXR spec. So that's why Oculus is kind of not recommending it for production yet, but you could develop for it now. You can kind of test it. If you have something in early production, you can certainly utilize OpenXR. You can build, the same project that you've set up for Oculus Quest, as well as for a high-end headset. And there was also a lot of questions, there was kind of, I don't want to call it dark times, but there was a time where, Unity wasn't really, there wasn't really a direct answer, and there were some compatibility issues with things like the HTC Vive or, just Steam VR in general. Obviously, there's the Valve Index headset. And really, we're at the point now, and we've worked with those partners and with, making this OpenXR package, this is really the path forward for those platforms and for those headsets. And then I had a little bit more. So one of the big questions we have here is, should I upgrade my project? Should I use OpenXR? Maybe I already have something where I'm using the different platform specific projects. And really, it's hard to do a blanket recommendation here, especially with what different platforms recommend, some of the different states of them. So we usually, recommend checking on the platform itself. And there's actually a guide in our documentation on OpenXR for the package that kind of goes through some of the limitations or some of the things that might not be available yet. So in the past, that was things like, running on an Android platform. So that was, obviously the Oculus Quest. Haptics weren't in, they are now. So definitely recommend checking that out and also just kind of gauging where you're at in your development lifecycle. The next big one, and I hear this a lot, when will feature X on platform Y be supported? And really, that's a little bit of a balance there where it's kind of meeting in the middle. Obviously, some work on the Unity side, we've enabled the OpenXR spec, and there's also some work on the platform specific side as well. So making sure that either, they're working on things like extensions, or they're working with the Kronos group, which, Unity is a part of, and we work really closely with to kind of get those different features within the spec. So then once those kind of get rolled in, as we continue to update the package, we can roll those in. And really, with this, just the idea of OpenXR, it's looking at kind of these shared features between platforms, right? Things like hand tracking is a great example. There's lots of different platforms that have it now. There's also kind of different ways to implement it, different things that are enabling. And so it's trying to find that middle ground where it can cover all the different use cases, it can make it into the spec, and then it can be kind of enabled at that core level and then available on all the platforms. So I just want to briefly introduce kind of the scriptable render pipelines. So I saw some questions about this as well. And if you're not familiar, this is kind of the evolution of rendering in Unity. So it's taking what we kind of call the black box that was rendering and just trying to open it up a little bit. So the universal render pipeline is really meant to kind of be available and work on all the different platforms. So this is everything from mobile up to the Switch, PCs, as well as all the consoles. And really, it's just kind of enabling different features. So we have things like the shader graph, which is kind of a node-based graph editor. There's also the VFX graph, and it's kind of trying to modernize some of the old rendering that was available, and also just give the developers and users more access to the different kind of layers and control over how it works. Some of the recent updates to it, there's things like point light shadows, post-processing can be enabled and disabled. And really this is actually kind of tie into things like shader includes and how much different kind of content you have within the package itself. And that can kind of help with, compilation times. There's also things with the unlit shader SRP batcher. So this is now compatible with OpenGLES. That's kind of on the Android side. And then screen space ambient occlusion. So that is basically a feature that can now be enabled, and it gives you kind of nice ambient occlusion in screen space. And that, of course, can be kind of configured and customized as well. Next is the high definition render pipeline. So this is really taking a lot of the kind of modern rendering features and kind of combining them into a single kind of high-end render pipeline. Now, this is really targeting for high-end PCs and consoles. So you'll see that we did recently enable it for kind of next-gen consoles like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox One Series X. But it's also looking at kind of high-end PC as well. So if you're developing something on, let's say, mobile, you're not going to be able to use the high definition render pipeline. They're actually, it kind of doesn't compile for those certain targets, and it's really looking at kind of the high end. Now, something I didn't mention with the SRPs is, in general, this is kind of an early decision that you want to make, either going with URP or HDRP or legacy, depending on where your project's at, and kind of using that throughout the project development lifecycle. There's not really any way to kind of switch between them right now. It's certainly some work we're exploring and looking into as far as having a single project that supports both, but in its current state, that's not the case. So as mentioned, some of the recent updates, things like the next-gen platform support with the consoles. There's also been some updates to the decal capabilities. We also recently enabled path tracing. So this is enabled for things like depth of field, fog, subsurface scattering. And it's really, I've seen a lot of kind of screenshots and stuff internally. It's really pushing kind of the visual fidelity and realism of what's possible, which is really exciting. And there's also screen space global illumination was recently added as well. So the last thing I want to do is, so this was kind of a bit of, just, looking at some of the questions and things like that. Now, of course, I'm not going to be able to answer everything. I'm also, just one person. I can't move mountains, but there was some questions just kind of generally around Unity engine stability. And I did want to share, one thing that we're really focusing on internally, especially as things get more complex, is kind of this idea of doing less and doing it better. And really that's this being carried through with R&D, where, can we focus on what we have today? Can we make sure that it's really stable? And can we make sure that, X feature works with Y feature? And that's kind of true throughout all the different features, as well as the kind of updates we're making with things like SRP, the new input system, et cetera. Now, we are, the latest release of Unity did actually ship with the lowest number of high user pain or HUP bugs. So there is some kind of work being done on that side. And of course, when you're developing a project and you're looking for the most stable version of Unity, we always recommend using the LTS or long-term supported version, which is supported up to 2 years. And that's where a lot of the bugs get backported to. And you'll see those kind of minor versions within that. So in the past, it was like the 0.4 version. We've switched it over to, only 3 releases a year. So now it's the 0.3 version. But in the Unity Hub, it should be kind of labeled LTS version, and that's going to be the most stable version. The tech stream, which is the kind of in-between versions, that's where we're really adding a lot of the new features and continuing to kind of push the updates there. And the last thing I want to say is just, from a high level standpoint, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of in package land, and that did just add some complexity. It added some complexity on our side. It added a lot of complexity on the user side. And there is just kind of some added challenges with that. What's the right version of the package? I updated my editor and this version of the package doesn't work with it, or this broke. And so that's definitely something we're aware of. We're also kind of looking at it from kind of a package lifecycle standpoint of like, when does a package become verified? How does it go through the QA process? How does it get tested against different, different packages and features and things like that? So yeah, I think that was pretty much it from my side. I think we're going to pass it off to the organizers here, and they're going to kind of source a lot of the questions here, and hopefully I can answer those.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. This is Elliot, and it seems like you did get to, you had a preview of some of our aggregated questions, and so you did a good job covering a bunch of questions I was going to ask already. There's been some more added, so some of these might seem a little bit redundant, but I'm gonna start off the first question about the render pipelines. And so it seems like HDRP and URP are big leaps forward for graphics, but they've also caused a lot of friction for developers trying them out and trying to migrate for an existing project. Is there some sort of roadmap for making that easier to switch not only between like built-in render pipeline to URP or HDRP, but between the scriptable render pipelines?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, with the current, I guess the current swap, so with built-in to HDRP or URP, we do have, we call it like a material updater that will at least transfer over some of those maps. Now, it is limited to, just the standard shader. So if you have a lot of custom shaders, you can write that transition yourself. So there is ways to kind of do that. But yeah, there is kind of that general upgrader that works with the standard one. There is a lot of work and kind of, things being done to swap between them. Now, the challenge there is that, when you look at like the feature count or the different kind of supported things with something like URP and HDRP, they're just really not on the same level. So you might have an HDRP shader that just has maps that, don't mean anything or aren't really applicable in certain shaders in URP. So, from a user standpoint, it's kind of looking at it more of like a holistic problem of like what is the best way forward from just a UI standpoint, from a user experience. There is this idea, especially I think, the Nintendo Switch is a good platform, right? It's there's a lot of games that come out on, let's say something like, PC, PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch. And, should that project be able to use HDRP on the platforms that support it and URP on, on the Switch? Yes, I think that makes sense. But we're just not there yet. But I think that is kind of something we're definitely exploring and trying to enable in the future, at least just from a kind of platform standpoint and being able to look at those different kind of render pipelines. There was some decisions made pretty early. The good news is there's a lot of resources on both the URP and HDRP team, and they are really looking into this and trying to solidify both the core scriptable render pipeline itself, as well as these different pipelines that we provide.
Cool. Just to follow up a little bit. So there was a question about are there plans for adding surface shader equivalents, and I actually did see that it on Twitter that maybe it is in 2021 or something, because there's certain shaders that can work across all the SRPs and built in and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. I mean, it's certainly been a very vocal group just in general. You know, there's of course shader graph is nice, but not everyone works that well. And there's also just challenges with graph-based tools. You know, you're looking at stuff like version control and all that. So it's definitely something we're hearing, and I think it's definitely something will be enabled in the future. But yeah.
Cool. And then last render pipeline related question we have here. Do you recommend using URP in 2D projects for production, or is that still experimental?
I do. I will say I don't do a ton of 2D projects. I have some colleagues that do, and the 2D stuff that they're making certainly really blows me away. So the URP has a specific feature set for 2D projects. It's things like lighting, you know, like specific 2D URP lights. There's lots of effects with, you know, normal maps and things like that to really kind of take the lighting and take 2D projects to the next level. So I would say, yes, I definitely recommend it. The tooling and the team behind that is very passionate about it. There's even some kind of small jokes internally where, you know, Unity's like, like real-time 3D, and, you know, the 2D team's like, but what about 2D? You know, it's like, so there's a lot of work being done. I would definitely recommend it. And there's a lot of just awesome features that really are not available or not translated back to kind of built in. So.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, one data point we were talking about this earlier is shipped Cozy Grove earlier this year on 7 platforms, and that's using URP 2D and lighting and all the normal map stuff that we were just talking about. So, yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Okay. Some question documentation. Documentation is something that is critically important when using any large piece of software, especially a closed source. Lately, Unity's documentation has been fragmented or outdated. What's Unity's plan for updating and maintaining engine documentation?
Yeah, so that's a good one. I don't want to say it's a loaded question. You know, I think it's certainly a fair one. I think everybody obviously, you know, wants documentation. On the packages side, so the package developers or the developers kind of maintaining packages do maintain their own documentation. Now, one of the biggest challenges I've actually found, you know, as a Unity developer is that our SEO in finding packages is terrible. So if I Google AR Foundation right now, I'm going to get the package documentation for an outdated version. So I highly recommend checking for there might be like a view latest button. There's also a drop down there. So I would say the biggest thing I would make sure you're on the latest package version, or you're just on the package version documentation for which package you're using. So that's kind of just a general flag there. With the kind of package development and with the life cycle there, it is kind of on those specific package or feature developers to maintain and do that documentation. Now, we of course have a documentation team that also assists them and things like that. But I would also say if you notice any bugs or issues on the documentation, certainly flag that. There's a little button down there. And there's a group of people who do go through and try to fix issues there. There's also been a couple of kind of internal projects where we do like a big documentation comb and try to update and improve samples and things.
Thank you.
Cool. So I have the next one. It's about mobile, which is near and dear to me. So one of the spaces where Unity obviously dominates, and rightfully so, is mobile. What's sort of the roadmap forward with mobile for Unity? I know you're talking a little bit earlier about Core AR, but more generally, is there like more platform specific stuff? Like, are we going to have, like iOS libraries for iCloud and that sort of thing, or what's the plan there?
Yeah, so I would say, one of the big things that I've been using a lot and is kind of most exciting is there's a device simulator. So this is actually a kind of alternate game view within the editor that allows you, and we ship with like, I want to say like 50 different mobile devices that have different aspect ratios and like safe areas for UI and things like that. So that's its own kind of package that's being updated. It emulates, doing things like going from landscape to portrait. You can also kind of change it at runtime. That's kind of one of the bigger things. There's also some work. We kind of shipped what we call Unity as a library. So this is actually being able to embed a Unity runtime kind of like mini project within a native mobile app. So, you're seeing obviously a little outside of gaming where there's a lot of, let's say a news app, something like the New York Times, they want to enable something like an AR feature. So they can actually build a small Unity project and embed that within their native mobile app, kind of linking the libraries there. So that's called Unity as a library. We also recently announced support for Chrome OS. So that's really big in the educational space. So you can actually output a Unity project now to Chrome OS. And there's some work with kind of things like Google Play Store. They're constantly adding, new features with kind of delivering kind of bite-sized versions of their projects and things. So yeah, I would say those are kind of the big things there. As far as mobile, we're certainly, close partners with Apple and Google, try to kind of work with them as new features and things like that come out. So
cool. There was a follow-up from the chat about the URP boat attack example. Is that ever going to be available for mobile?
So we have, we showed it at one point on Switch. I know it's been running on mobile, and I know we've used it for some kind of performance test and things like that. I did see it says, okay, so it was at first I thought it was Unity 2018, but it looks like it was a 2018 flagship Android device. But yeah, I would say yes, I think it can work. It's some of the devices. I will say in general, our like metal rendering and rendering on iOS might be a little bit faster there. But yeah, as far as I know, I'm not sure if the project itself is still being maintained. I can tell you the lead developer and technical artist behind it still works at Unity. So if you maybe post an issue or something, he might be able to get back to you on GitHub.
Cool. Yeah, so the next topic was dots. So dots is obviously like the most significant change that's happened to Unity ever, like since Unity was created. And it's sort of been this thing that's been lurking in the background for the last, 5 to 8 years. And it's really cool to see how it's evolved and how this technology has progressed. And as an engineer, like, I just want to use it, man. Like when is this stuff going to be ready for production? When can I actually get my hands dirty with it? Like, I know there's a lot of preview stuff out now, but I want to like use it in a real project.
Yeah. So, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I mean, the reality is it is kind of in still a little bit of this preview state. And some of that's being validated by, some large partners and customers where they need what Dots offers. They need the scalability. They need some of those kind of large simulations, and their game is kind of applicable to it. I think there was a little bit of I don't want to say like an eye-opening or a awakening moment at Unity, but I think the reality was, with Dots and how you're kind of structuring your code, how you're just working, using Dots within the Unity development experience, it was actually a big shift in just the general workflows within the editor. There's things like, there's no game objects and you can't click on an entity and you can't do this. And so I think it was, there's been a lot of talk and development where, how do we enable, all that's possible within a Dots ecosystem and framework, but in a more Unity and a more accessible way. So there's still a lot of work and development happening. There's a lot of kind of projects and developers and things that are using certain parts of it. I think like, when you think of maybe a certain computationally heavy process or something like that, I think it can fit in. We also have like Dots physics now, which is again a lot. It's a different path, but can be a lot more performant in certain situations. So I'll say at a high level, it's still coming. I would say don't hold your breath, but keep your excitement. And just in general, there's kind of work being done to not necessarily hide the complexity, but make the complexity and make the workflows more Unity-like. So we can really enable this not just to the most technical of audience, but also to all Unity developers to take advantage when they need it and where they need it.
Awesome, thanks.
I'm going to move on to questions about the UI. Personally, the biggest revolution in Unity was getting rid of the GUI. But where we are now with UI and looking at the future with UI, which is the newer UI framework, which I believe is still not yet ready for prime time. Can you speak to a bit about where we're at with UI and the goals of the new toolkit and how it's going to work alongside what we have now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I will say, I don't know a ton about it. I know some about it. I haven't personally really used it in a project yet, but you are right. It is still a little bit in development. One of the biggest kind of goals and ideas behind the UI toolkit is how do we take kind of known or common workflows in things like web development for quickly building up kind of style sheets and certain applications there related to kind of UI heavy applications, and how do we bring that to a game developer audience, and how do we kind of build something that's flexible around that? So that's kind of the big idea behind it. Now there's still limitations where you're looking at things like how on our side it's like, how do we switch a lot of the editor tooling or the new editor and things like that over to utilizing it, and then how do we enable developers to just build more flexible tooling? Obviously, a lot of these complex Unity games and projects require some of these custom tools, and how can we make that process easier? So those are some of the kind of big ideas behind it. I will say there is some documentation right now where it just kind of goes through and compares all the different systems. It says, what's planned, what's not. The nice thing, and I saw some questions around this of like, not another new feature or another new system in Unity. I was going to say, some of the nice things is, when we build some of these new systems, we can kind of integrate them more closely with these other kind of evolutions we're doing. So obviously looking at things like SRP, things like obviously Text Mesh Pro and all that. So like making sure that those all kind of move alongside some of these newer systems is some of the work that's being done there.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So the next set of questions was sort of the future of XR, our foundation, XR Manager. You've pretty much addressed that for the most part, and you did a good job at that. So I'll just throw you one more curveball. Some people like myself and other developers, not only in games but film and other forms of entertainment, we're trying to sort of have applications that will be crossover between AR and VR. And how do you see working on a project that would maybe like start off on a phone and end up in a headset, something like that, like in the same project? Is that something that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible. No, so I think at a high level there, that's actually really been something that's really exciting and compelling to non-game developers with Unity. If you're looking at obviously we worked with like Disney in the past, is they can make a pre-rendered animation, and then they can use potentially some of those assets, and that was all made in Unity, and then they can use those in a mobile game spinoff or something like that. So I think that is kind of one of the exciting opportunities is if you've kind of configured your content within one Unity project or for one use case, you can use it across different ones. I think for something like a single project that's in that has both AR and VR capabilities, there's going to be some challenges of just how or where does that content exist, and kind of different I guess interaction models and things like that from like a user standpoint. I want to say that the kind of XR plugin management, at least with a custom loader configuration, is flexible enough to handle something like that. And I think on the development side, it'd probably be loading different scenes, from like the boot sequence, depending on what platform you're on. I think that there's also an additional challenge there of like, you can't just say if Android do this, because the Android is Oculus Quest as well as AR Core. But yeah, I think there's, to me, I think it's really exciting when you think of kind of these non-gaming use cases, and you think of like an IP or a certain I guess character or a certain theme or a story just being told through these different mediums on different platforms. There's been a lot of work actually on the kind of media and entertainment side. We actually have a virtual camera that's available now. That's like an iPad app. You can start to do, kind of the motion tracking and things with AR, translate that back over, kind of live linked into Unity. There's facial mocap, things like that. But yeah.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, the custom loader seems really, I wasn't aware of that. That seems really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is sort of also related to XR. Someone asked on the Twitch channel, is Unity planning to continue to support discontinued headsets while their manufacturers support it as well? So I guess that would be like Oculus Rift, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, platform packages or platform support usually, I don't want to say die with an LTS, but they usually kind of, get cut off with the LTS versions there. If that's happening within the cycle and it was available in the LTS, it'll, or in the tech stream, it will be available in the LTS, which kind of gives it, potentially 2 years of life. There is some obligations, and there's also just some kind of partner agreements and things there where we do try to support their platforms. But I guess if it comes down to, is Unity going to keep a dead platform alive, or is a partner going to keep it alive? To me, that I think, and I think we've seen Google do this a little bit. I think it's a little bit more on kind of like an open source community potentially to do that. Now, with that being said, I still see bugs and things come up with like the cardboard SDK. So there are some challenges there. And I think it's, if there's certain paths forward within, within Unity, I think we'll want to enable it. But with that being said, a lot of those older platforms do kind of get locked to an LTS. So, I think in the like cardboard SDK, it's recommending like 2018.4. And, even though we've added a lot of new features, we've enabled new things, it's not really feasible to kind of go up to the newer versions there.
Cool, thanks. And switching gears, I have the next question too about Package Manager. And once again, you've preempted me. So congrats on that. I know I ran into difficulty, like you were saying. I'd search and find what package works with a certain version of Unity, and then the SEO would bring me to like the wrong place. Or sometimes packages will have a compatibility chart, and they're not the same in all the documentation. Is there like a way to quickly determine like what's the correct package manager package?
Yeah, unfortunately, me personally, as I've even looked around for some of this, and there, there is some things, not necessarily on the like public facing documentation, but the general practice is you're on, if you're in a version of Unity, you don't have preview packages enabled. The package you're going to see is going to be kind of the current verified version. Now, if you do a little drop down, there might be 1 or 2 versions ahead. And that's kind of, on the back end of, hey, it's one of the good things about packages is we can push updates and we can have, newer versions outside of the core editor release. Now, what that also means is that sometimes you'll grab, a 1.2 version of the package that says it's verified, and then you do a drop down and you find there's a 1.4 that's verified as well. So what I recommend there is kind of for I guess, stability is, you don't enable preview packages. You find one that's verified for the version of Unity that you're in. You check the dropdown and see if there's a higher one that has the verification tag. And then each package does have a view documentation button on it. So I recommend that as well. That at least gets you on the right track of, the documentation for the package you're at least using in your project currently.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. So I guess I'm next. So I have a question about sort of the very broad strokes technical direction of Unity. So obviously we've talked about the package management a lot. That is sort of like the biggest change in the technical direction, is that we're sort of moving away from this monolithic one stream development into these different packages. That was a lot of pros and a lot of cons. So one of the nice things about it is that, like you were just talking about, you could get updates much more quickly than you could previously, and bug fixes too. And you can try out different things and mix and match and use whatever you need. The other downside of it is that it's kind of hard to see like what, I think a lot of the questions coming up to this, we're sort of touching on this, like what the vision of what the future of Unity is, right? There's all these different packages that maybe do the same thing. And it's like, okay, well, is Unity designing Unity, is like the future of Unity supposed to use the new input system and the new UI system and the new this, the new that, or is there going to be different streams where these things are going to be, coexisting? Or like, maybe you can speak to some general guidance about thinking about this sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely a good question. I think on one hand, yes, we're building new things and we want, people to be using the new things there. I think, where we're also leaning into, and I think that hasn't really been touched on as much, is, so I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Unity Hub. And really we're actually expanding and working on a lot of different templates. So trying to kind of give people a really good base for these different projects and for different development streams. And part of that is actually this onboarding of, hey, here's a project in this version of Unity that you're using with all the right packages that you need, that all work together and has been through this, full QA process. So it's kind of like that, that hub and kind of templatized version of, almost, I don't want to say it's not different versions of Unity, but it's like a Unity projects that's configured for what you're trying to do. And that's actually been kind of a big challenge on the XR side of things, where it's just like, okay, I have a package, or I just start a new Unity project and it's kind of configured for high-end PC. And then I'm trying to build it for, a VR device, or I'm trying to go down to Android, and, shadows aren't even rendering. And, so it's like, how can we help with that on just a settings side of things? And, I think there's also, there has been some talk internally of, I don't think we've done a great job with exposing different settings. So, the SRPs have all their own settings in them, and some of those settings are also in the project settings. And so it's like, wait, I enabled shadows here and then I disabled them there. And, so I think there's definitely been some added complexity there. I think from the Unity standpoint is we're really just trying to almost, almost like streamline or give people better, like, I guess, better starting points, right? Like, and we've have some basic templates in there now. We're also, shipping even some like non-gaming ones. There's like a automotive showroom that's pretty cool. And for me too, like I have a lot of artist buddies and stuff, and they'll come like, I want to use Unity, but like, how do I make it look good? Or like, what's going on there? And now I can say, grab the HDRP template, remove that little gold ball, import your model, and lighting's at least set up, and so right. I think we're moving in that direction with some of these templates. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more templates for kind of these different starting points that provide some of the sample projects. We're looking at, like, can a template be base Unity with just all the settings? And then can a, template plus sample project be that with a couple cool assets that you could learn from, you could start to build on top of, kind of expanding in those directions. Does that kind of answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, like one of the things that I've thought a lot about is, sort of this move to packages sort of makes it into an ecosystem, right? It's a software ecosystem rather than like a software product. And it's sort of shifting more from what you would normally think of as a game engine into something that is like a programming language, almost like where you have Python, you have pip, you have all these packages you can use. And so it's sort of begs the question, like where does Unity see the engine itself going? Is it just going to be like this really thin layer at the bottom, or is there going to be like, you know, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's hard.
yeah.
It's hard to think about this stuff, you know.
And I think there was, especially when when packages were first kind of coming out, and there was kind of this talk of, if I don't need 2D, why do I have all these 2D things? And why does my compilation take, 30 extra seconds because of it? And so I think there is that idea. I think what we also realized is if we go too far in that direction, then it just becomes a headache of, well, where's my text? Where's my, it's like you're just missing stuff. And now it's just a bad user experience. So,
right.
I think it's really about kind of finding that middle ground where, can we be this, rendering, physics, scripting platform, and then you start to build up, really what you need for your specific project or what sort of tooling you can do. And I think, even on like the SRP side of things, it's like, we realized, well, once we enable SRP, now we're, compiling, 80 different shader variants. And well, you don't, you might not even need all of those. So it's kind of like a little bit of give and take where we're trying to meet that middle ground, but also realizing, at the end of the day, the strength of Unity is really, you grab it, you're in it, you hit the ground running, and all the stuff is there that you need. And if we, if we take too much out, or, we don't find that middle ground, you kind of hit these awkward walls where, where did 2D colliders go? Where did sprite shapes go? Or, some of these things. And so, just trying to work towards that. And that's, what with the templates and things of, can we skim things down a little more, but make sure that we're giving people the right tooling and packages that they need for what kind of project they're working on.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks.
Okay, I have kind of more generic Unity roadmap questions to round us off for the night. One question that actually came to me earlier on was on the topic of editor releases and point updates. Do you see any improvements to the way that my releases are handled? Do you see where we can have like a small patch that updates part of the editor rather than having to download the whole editor? Do you see a way that we could have pop up on the screen that says there's a new version of Unity out? This will fix your problem with the package manager not doing what it should do, the lighting doing something obtuse, a little mini tiny condensed patch notes to encourage people to get their bugs fixed. So you situation where you're having to support customers on 5 different platforms, like one of our community members has had to do in the past, where his customers are on, they've bought an asset off the asset store, and because the package manager had us in it for a few releases, he had a lot of trouble trying to talk them through the problem. Can you speak to a bit of that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, from a high level, sounds like a great idea. I haven't personally heard of ideas internally towards that. It's also, I don't know about everyone here or people in chat, but like every time I load up Unity, there's that little pop up about updating, and I just close that every time. I never update. But yeah, I think there is ways to kind of expose that. It's tough too, because again, with this packages, I don't want to say packagization or something, but as we've done these packages, that's another thing too, is like people might look at like the release notes for the latest version of the editor, or even a blog post, and it has all these fixes, and they say, oh, my thing in the VR package didn't get fixed. But actually in that version of the package, it did get fixed, and so we're at least doing a little bit towards like, trying to prompt people with updating packages, but But it also gets a little tricky when we're talking about things like pre-release or experimental or preview packages as well. Yeah, so I mean, I like the idea. I think, there also has been a little bit more trying to follow up on, when users submit bugs, and you'll kind of hear back if it's been fixed, or have some communication around that. And I will say, usually when bugs get fixed, they get fixed in what we call trunk, so they get fixed in the latest and greatest version of the editor, and then it kind of rolls back and gets backported to the different versions. And I think that's actually been another kind of common theme or challenges I've seen and heard with the community is, we might come out and say, hey, like we've done a lot of work with import time. So we said, hey, this project used to take 5 minutes to import, and now it takes 30 seconds. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. And then it's like, and it's in version 2021 or 2022.2. And you're like, I mean, I'm not even going to use that version till, 2030, or, so it's like, there's been some kind of challenges there where, a lot of the work does get done, obviously, kind of at that head, or at that, tip of trunk. And then it kind of rolls back towards LTS versions, obviously, and things like that. But yeah, it is kind of challenging when bugs do get fixed, and then not always backported. It kind of depends on the bug a little bit, and sometimes the customer. But yeah, I hope that kind of answered that question.
Yeah, it kind of does. I mean, I've had to live through the problem of having like 4 different versions of the editor installed for different projects. Sometimes the same project, but minor point releases, XR. I've lived that problem. But yeah, the problem of disk space was actually a major. If I want to download another copy of the Unity editor, that's all of those gigabytes I have to spend time downloading alongside the existing installation. And then I have to spend time doing all the micromanagement about, okay, upgrade the project, uninstall the old version. And it's
Yeah.
a small point release, and there's no way to just do a minor patch to just update my version. It's painful,
Yeah, there are some updates coming to the hub. I'm not sure if that's part of it. At least from my perspective, the like build modules helps with that a little bit. But at the same time, I do a lot of iOS development, so I'm installing like the biggest build module every time. So yeah, I definitely feel your pain. I think it's some feedback I can talk to or just pass along to the hub team and see, as that gets updated. We're looking also at, what does downloading the Unity editor for the first time look like? Like right now, it's just looking at a loading bar, and it's like you're kind of waiting to get in there. But yeah, that's some good feedback.
Okay. There were a couple of concerns about Unity's direction in general. There's always a lot of talk about other markets and other sectors, automotive and film. And not as much talk these days about games. Can you reassure the game development community that Unity's got your back?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Unity in gaming is always kind of our home. It's something that is, really evident in a lot of the kind of leadership, in the directions, in the different kind of opportunities and things like that. It's definitely something where, what we're trying to do in the core editor experience and for game developers, it just happens to start to bleed out to some of these other industries. And it just happens to, hey, we're pushing graphic fidelity with HDRP. Who else wants really nice looking things? Car manufacturers, and so it's some of that thing. And, I will say, like, obviously, we talked about it before this live stream went live, is that Unity is growing a lot. There's a lot of people at the company, and there's a lot of different teams focused on different things. And I'll say, from my perspective, there hasn't been any decision of, well, this thing's for games, let's, divert those resources to something else. It's really, we still have, the core engine team, R&D, now spread all throughout the world. There's, big offices in Montreal, obviously founded in Copenhagen. And really it's, how do we continue to build that core editor experience, and how do we, make those decisions that make sense for game developers? But, we're not, and with that in mind, we're also building up other teams to focus on some of these different industries and different applications of Unity outside of that. And really, I'm sure as longtime Unity users and developers, Unity has been used for games for a long time as well. It's something we've been conscious of, but we just haven't supported from like, a team and business perspective as much. And I think we're at the point now where there is an opportunity there. So we're, gonna support them and help them along while still kind of maintaining our focus and effort on game developers and games.
Okay, a couple left. Let me see. What are your thoughts on the competition?
I think competition's great. I think it's always good to continue to push the industry. I think it's I think there's always healthy competition. Obviously, there's some exciting stuff coming out, from Epic with Unreal 5 and things like that. And I think for me, it's always I'm just excited from the game industry perspective. It's exciting when people are talking about it. It's exciting to see new news. It's exciting to see kind of technology continue to be pushed forward. For me, I think it's healthy to have competition. I think there's lots of different use cases and applications. I think there might be some better use cases where Unreal makes more sense to use for a project than Unity, and I think that's okay. And I think it's okay to kind of acknowledge that and say that and kind of understand that there's different tools out there that solve your need. And really, as a developer, it's about finding the tool that makes the most sense for you and kind of utilizing that for the project you're working on.
Okay. All right. 2 last questions for you then. Let's go with this one first. Which features are being deprecated in the near future? What should developers avoid adopting right now if they're starting out in a new project or trying to migrate away from?
I don't know if I have necessarily a list of that kind of off the top of my head. I'll say, maybe hover over some APIs or something in your IDE and check that deprecated tag. But no, I'm not. I don't want to say, don't do this or do that. And, a lot of people ask me around like SRPs, like if I start a project today, should I use built-in or should I use URP or what? And, really it's not, there's not really a great answer for every project yet. There's still features in built-in renderer that aren't available in URP. So if you need some of those features, or if you're, doing a certain project, it still makes sense to use the built-in renderer. I would say maybe use TextMesh Pro, not Unity Text. I'll say that one. But yeah, I can't really think of anything specifically that we're kind of moving away from. It's just kind of marching forward, and there's lots of new stuff. And I think if you can, I always if you can back up your project, do a little bit of research or try out a certain feature or a certain kind of new thing, then I think it's always good to do a little bit of technical exploration there if it kind of meets your needs and if it enables better workflows. I think that's one of the things there of like, if I was starting a project today and I had an artist heavy team, well, I think the SRPs make a lot of sense. I think, now we have the VFX graph, we have the shader graph, and those are kind of only enabled in the SRP. So there's lots of kind of questions to weigh there. And I think it's kind of, dependent on the project, dependent on the, what you're targeting, things like that.
Okay, awesome. Well, I've got one more question before I ask it. Just to note to the audience, if you have any last questions, please type them into chat now so we can ask them. And I will just leave you with one more question. What are you most excited for that's coming up?
That's a good one. Yeah, I would say there's lots of stuff I'm excited for that I can't really talk about. So that's I should have thought of a more general thing. I mean, I think for me, I am excited about the scriptable render pipelines. There's a Unity as a company. We're on Slack, and I'm in 1,000 Slack channels. And there's like an HDRP Slack channel, and some of the images in there, it's like I've started to do some double takes on, is that a real photograph or is that pre-rendered? And the cool thing is, we see a lot of customer projects and things like that. So I think for me, it's like how yeah, how some of the scriptable render pipelines are just pushing Unity forward, especially with yeah, some of the path tracing stuff. It's like these are like product photos you would see in like a magazine, you know, it's just, and it looks like a photograph, but it's just all kind of rendered in real time. And so I think there's a lot of exciting things on how that's all coming together, and then how that's just pushing out new projects, you know, and we're seeing a lot of things. You know, I'm sure everyone here kind of keeps up to date on like the Nintendo announcements and the Sony announcements and all that stuff. And it's just exciting for me as you know, a Unity employee. It's like for those events, they'll sometimes be like, hey guys, like this got announced and it's made with Unity. And like everyone, you know, gets really excited. And I feel like more and more I'm seeing the projects that people didn't think were made in Unity. Like that looks amazing. I can't believe that. And you know, and so that's just been really fun and exciting as more games get released, and you know, everyone at the company gets excited, and it's just fun to see more of those projects and just see how the visual fidelity is continuing to kind of be pushed from our customers and users.
Awesome. All right, thank you. We've had a question. Is there a feature or aspect of Unity that you think is underutilized or needs more attention?
That's a good one. Let's see. Underutilized or needs more attention. I mean, I think, yeah, I think, you know, Graham, you touched on this a little bit with some of the kind of mobile stuff. I mean, for me, again, I've been doing, especially on like the AR side, I've been doing a lot of mobile stuff for the past couple of years. And I think something that potentially is a little underutilized is there's just a lot of cool stuff coming out on some mobile platforms. And, you know, of course you can write native wrappers and enable all that, but it's less on our side. There's a package called Adaptive Performance, and it was actually developed in combination with Samsung for their like specific API for like basically scaling up and down based on mobile performance. So it's looking at things like, you know, clock cycles, GPU, heat, etc., where you can start to enable or disable, you know, more or less stuff. And I think that's kind of something where, you know, I don't think there's a ton of visibility on that, but I think it's an interesting idea. And I think it can start to kind of expand out to different platforms as well, where it's like, there's a lot going on in mobile. Also, mobile devices are just getting way better and like way more powerful. And there's a lot of stuff there where I think maybe we could be taking advantage of some of those native APIs or enabling that in like an easier way for developers. So I think maybe that would be something a little underutilized where, you know, of course we're so strong on mobile, but there's still some of these platform things where, you know, I watched like a WWDC keynote and I'm like, oh my God, can we do that in Unity? And it's like, oh, you know, okay, you could write a native plugin, but yeah.
Awesome. I think that's our last question. Feeling particularly grilled at this point, I imagine.
That was a lot. That was
a lot of questions.
Yeah, I feel like they got a little spicier as the night went on, but yeah.
Left you with some nice ones at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Dan. This has been fantastic. Yeah, I think we're all questioned out.
Should we
Awesome.
close out?
I think we should. I think we probably should. Dan Miller of Unity, thank you so much for coming to join us tonight. It has been a pleasure to have you with us again. You did present for us a few years ago, didn't you?
Yes, I have been in there in person, but it's been a while. So
it's been a while, but it's good to see you. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Bug, we will be back next month, so stay tuned for information on our next meetup.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks again.
It was a lot of fun.
Cool.
Okay.